Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be the books I read in January. The Promise by Damon Galgut. This book is set in South Africa and it revolves around a white African family. So the story sort of starts with the death of the mother, and before she dies, she takes a promise from her husband that the black servant who works there gets the land on which she lives. This is overheard by their youngest daughter, and the story sort of progresses from there, and it takes us through many decades until the children grow up to see what happens with the promise. And also, does the promise really change anything for either parties? This novel is a satire on politics, on corruption, on religion, apartheid system. It's a story of the decline of this white family, and it sort of symbolizes how the old South Africa needs to die in order to be rebuilt into a new one. It's about race, it's about struggle and survival, it's about religion and morality, guilt, family institution, and essentially the complicated relationships between a white person and a black person, and an equally complicated history of South Africa. But what really stands out about this book is its chaotic narration. There's often abrupt changes in the pace between characters. Sometimes you're in people's dreams, sometimes ghosts pop up. It goes from an outward action to the innermost feelings of the characters. It's just so rapid that you feel close to the character, but then you also don't, because everything just seems unimportant, and yet it leaves a deep impact on you. The style of writing really won my heart, more than the plot, more than the characters. It's so witty, it's full of dark humor. So if you're looking to read any apartheid literature, then you should definitely check this out. 5 on 5 for sure. It was amazingly written. The next one is Mouse by Art Spiegelman. It is a graphic novel narrating the survival of Vladek Spiegelman and his wife Anja, the author's parents, during the Holocaust. This was actually the first graphic novel ever to win the Pulitzer, so I was intrigued. Honestly, I was skeptical going in because I personally prefer words when it comes to stories. That's just who I am. I was not sure how he would do justice to the emotions and to the depth of such a gruesome part of history, but I have to say, like, it did what it was meant to do. It felt serious enough. There were these range of emotions and these range of themes that were present. So while it is about what went down in the Holocaust, what went down in the concentration camps, and how his father and his mother survived, it's also about Otto's own strained relationship with his dad. It portrays how the ways in which his father had survived the war make him a really difficult person to deal with in life right now, how his father struggles to fit into the modern world, to find an identity for himself, to get used to the new and honestly easier ways of life in America. It talks about survival's guilt, but also the guilt of the author. A lot of times we see him thinking about how difficult it is for him to even imagine the place and imagine the horrors that went down, and he feels guilty for not going through that with his parents, especially when things don't go well between him and his father. The way the Holocaust trauma has not only affected the people who survived it, but it's still like passed on in their families, and it's ever present even today. Such a complex book, and it did justice to how complex the war itself was. Now, I do not have a reference to compare it with other Holocaust works because I haven't read any, but standalone, I really enjoyed it. It takes quite a bit of courage to handle something so delicate in the form of comics, essentially. But if you're a comics fan and you also like literary works, then this is the one for you. Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. I was just so shocked when I read it. It was just so deeply unsettling. So a guy called Gregor, who's a salesman, he wakes up one day and learns that he's transformed into this huge insect, and then the story progresses from there. But let me tell you, the transformation is not as shocking as the way he accepts the transformation, the way his family handles the transformation. I have not read anything like this in my entire life. Like, the whole time I was just like, what is happening? Why is it happening? There's honestly no touch of humanity in the entire book, except for maybe like a couple of lines. There were no emotions. Even as a reader, like, I was just like, I cannot even feel sad for you, you know, because like, you are not feeling sad for yourself. Nobody's feeling sad for you. So it deals with the themes of alienation, of powerlessness, but it was just so absurd. And this is good because obviously you need a good amount of creative genius to write something like that. But for some reason, like, I don't know what to think about it. I can't even bring myself to think about it because it's so disturbing. If that is your cup of tea, please go for it. The next one is Karukku by Bama. It's an autobiographical piece, revolves around what it means to be a Tamil Dalit Christian woman. It's actually a first Dalit autobiography in Tamil. She talks about the Dalit community, her childhood, how she grew up, exploitation and the oppression that takes place by the upper caste people, police, government, the church, the violence that happens within the community between different castes, and most importantly, how religion and the church institutions are used to oppressing the Dalits even more. The interesting thing is there's no linear narration in the book. She doesn't go through specific timelines in order. She comes at different themes through many different perspectives, through the lens of education or through the lens of superstitions, through the lens of religious practices, etc. etc. Talks about the ways in which the church operated when she was a school-going girl, and then she revisits that from an adult perspective and sort of tells us all the religious trauma involved. And then eventually when she goes to college, she doesn't have money, she is discriminated against, and so she decides to become a nun at a convent so she can help the poor Dalit kid to come for education. Then she realizes the sad truth of discrimination that happens even inside the convent, even when she's trained and experienced just as all the other nuns. But now she's discriminated against not just for being a Dalit, but also because of being a Tamil Dalit. And she exposes the world of difference between what the church and its institutions say they do for the poor and what they actually do, the corruption that's involved. And so eventually she decides to leave the convent, and that is where the novel ends. It's a very vulnerable, very intimate account of one's own life, where she talks about how lonely she feels sometimes, how hard it was growing up with untouchability and with sort of always being reminded of the fact that you are not allowed to make progress and have a dignified life. It's a great subaltern piece of literature. It shows us the life outside of mainstream India, what it means to be someone belonging to a marginalized community, and all the struggles that are thrown your way every single day so you remain marginalized than other people, the privileged people having better lives for themselves. The next one is Blood and Honey by Shelby Morin. This is the second book of the Serpent and Dove series. So it's fantasy fiction, YA, enemies to lovers. I am not a big fan of enemies to lovers simply because there are very few books that are written well. It just gets very boring really quickly. But when I had read Serpent and Dove sometime last year, I actually genuinely enjoyed it so much. I loved the plot, I loved the characters, loved the way the story progressed. It was well paced, it was written so nicely. This one, honestly, I would say was very underwhelming as compared to the first one. It felt like the entire story and the plot was just building up to nothing. Of course, the introduction of new characters and the new plot lines, they were interesting, and the dynamic between Raid and Lou was really good. It was mature, it was realistic. The angst part, it was satisfying. There were times when they were cross with each other, a lot of character development on their own, which I really enjoyed. But apart from that, the book did not have much going on. As like most of the reviews said, it did seem like a filler book for the third part. Could have been better if it was just like a two-part series, and it was also low-key cringe sometimes, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, I mean, I was hooked with the storyline, so honestly I think I'm gonna be reading the next part too, simply because I want to know what happens, and I pray to God that the last one is good. If you're into fantasy fiction, hopefully the series is for you, because I'm yet to read the last one, but give it a shot. Now, I also read two self-help books this month. First one is The Mountain Is You by Brianna Weiss. So it's a book about self-sabotage and how to get out of your own way. She sort of introduces the concept of self-sabotaging behaviors, and she gives like different examples of how you could be doing that consciously or subconsciously, and she also talks about how to break that pattern. And there was so many cool insights. There was this one bit where she talks about what gut feeling is, and I was simply blown away by it. It was just such a new concept to me. So she talks about how gut feeling is not a prediction, so it's not something you know beforehand. That's just projection of your own experiences and your own fears, but instead like you experience something and then you have a gut feeling telling you if it's good for you or not. And I was one of those people who believed otherwise. Like I thought like gut feeling is knowing everything like before something happens. It was such an empowering perspective, honestly, because oftentimes like we come to the worst case scenarios on our head and we're like, oh, that's my gut telling me something, but it's not. Until and unless you experience something, you cannot tell if it's a gut feeling. For example, you are applying for a job and you think that your gut feeling is telling you that the job is not good for you. She says that it's just a projection of your own fear. But if you go to the interview and you talk to the people and you meet the people, and then if you feel that it's not for you, that is your gut feeling, because you have like evidence for it, and then your gut will tell you if you're in alignment with it or not. That bit was like so epic. I loved it. And there's also this future self visualization meditation that she talks about. And for some reason, I have never come across that before. So that was really amazing, that bit. So you just sort of like ask your future self to come to you and then give guidance as to how you can become that version of you. There's this section in the book which talks about what it really means to heal your mind. And this entire chunk of it has my whole heart. It hit home to me. I think that is like my favorite part of the entire book. However, towards the end, I felt like the book was just getting really repetitive. She was sort of just stating the same thing she'd already discussed. And I also felt the concepts were very briefly explained. I wish she went into more detail, because it was like an example and then how to get over it. But I would have liked if there was more depth to it, if there was just more explanation to it. That being said, it definitely is a great starting point to sort of do your own research and dig deeper into self-sabotage and what it means and how you could be doing that in your own life. And the other one I read is Life Lessons. Two experts on death and dying teach us about the mysteries of life and living. It's by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler. So it's got like these 14 lessons of life: authenticity, love, relationships, loss, power, guilt, time, fear, anger, play, patience, surrender, forgiveness, happiness. So it's basically everything that every self-help book talks about, but all of these lessons come from people who are dying or who are like terminally ill. So it sort of like gives a more emphasizing perspective and almost like a more urgent one, because it's basically coming from people who do not have as much time. And so they sort of like reflect that back to us, showing us that we do not have a lot of time and that life is short. So we might as well live it with more purpose, with more meaning. There's lots of case studies in every single chapter or lesson. They give you stories from the people that they've counseled, people they've interviewed. Of course, if you are scared of the idea of death, the concept of death, and anything related to it, then do not push yourself to read it. Not gonna lie, there were definitely some bits which left me feeling uncomfortable and borderline anxious. So definitely keep that in mind. I personally really loved the book, except for the entire fear of death, of dying, which I think is the point of the book, to make us understand that it's inevitable. And so just staying in denial about it is not the solution. It sort of hit that point home really hard. And I like that. It's a hard pill to swallow, but I think a necessary one. Alright, you guys, those are the 7 books I read in the month of January. I hope you pick up some of them yourself. And if you do, comment down below which ones you liked, which ones you did not like. We can have a chat about it. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you in the next one. Bye!